Amelia Pan stayed home in Canada while her husband and 2-year-old daughter visited a dying family member overseas during the Chinese New Year. But father and daughter were separated when Pan's husband was admitted to hospital after contracting coronavirus. Her daughter has been in quarantine ever since and was not able to get on that chartered flight. Amelia Pan joins us from our Vancouver studios. Hi, Miss Pan. Thanks very much for making time for us. I appreciate it. I know this is a difficult period.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Can I ask for the latest on your daughter? How's she doing?
Yeah, so I was hoping to get my daughter on the first evacuation plane, but that didn't happen because my daughter developed a fever. So they put her in a hospital room. She wasn't able to leave in time. So right now her fever has been, under control for the past, 12 hours. And if it stays this way till Saturday, they may be able to let her go to catch the second evacuation plane. That's what I hear might be out on Sunday.
Okay, yeah. The information that we had from the Foreign Affairs Minister today, I believe, was that the plane would be departing Wuhan on February 10th, I believe it was, and landing in Canada on February 11th. So is that from the government that you've heard, that if she is okay health-wise by Saturday, that she would be able to board that plane?
I haven't heard any confirmation, as they don't have any details regarding the second plane. They're still working on the first,
right.
So I don't know.
So they haven't said anything to you about the second plane?
Not yet.
And how is she doing health-wise? You said she had a fever and she's in the hospital?
Yeah, well, when she had the fever, they tested her blood, did a blood sample, and they did an X-ray, and so far so good. I haven't heard anything about it, so no news is good news. And they're in the process of doing a diagnostic tests on her, and that takes about 3 days. So if she appears negative on that thing, and her fever has been down consistently for the 2 days in the future, then she should be able to go. That's what I hear from the Chinese local authorities.
So that's from the Chinese local authorities, not the Canadian government?
The Canadian government, because I registered my daughter for the first flight, so they have her information. At this moment, I just don't know whether my daughter will be out in time. And I'm also applying to see if I could be on that evacuation flight to Wuhan, so I can grab my daughter and keep her in my company and be with her in the quarantine.
I understand that. I can, the first thing when I heard your story, I thought of it, I can't imagine not being able to be with her. How has this been for you?
Oh my gosh. Every day is a new low for me. Well, I really hope my day will brighten up when my daughter gets out of the hospital and get on that second plane, and knowing that she will be safe and sound with some family members like myself. I really hope that could happen.
Because she hasn't been, who has been caring for her? Well, because your husband has been obviously in quarantine as well, right?
That's right.
And so who has been caring for her?
Before, when my daughter first entered the quarantine, because she was being taken care of by one of our neighbors, the whole family of that neighbor went into quarantine with her. So the lady in the household was staying with my daughter in the same room. But after 2 days, I guess it was too much pressure. Well, I can't really blame her. She backed out. So right now, one of our cousin-in-law, very distant relative, but the only relative that can be available for her, so she is currently with my daughter, our cousin-in-law, whom I never met, and my daughter has never either.
Oh my goodness, this must be just something you could never have imagined, I guess.
Well, can never. Yeah, how can that be? Well, just this innocent trip back to China, and now look at what's happening around us and around the world. It's just unimaginable to me.
Is there anything in particular that you are wondering about from the Canadian government? Is there anything, I mean, I know you want to get your daughter on that second flight. You would like to accompany her. Would you like more communication from the government? What are you looking for specifically, I guess?
So at this moment, ironically, before with the first flight, I hope they could get to China as soon as possible. But right now, I'm hoping the second plane could come a little bit later, like 1-2 days later. So hopefully, my daughter should have enough time to get get on that plane. So right now, I'm really hoping that my husband can get out of the hospital in time to accompany my daughter on the flight. But if he can't, do I have some contingency plans? Because with the first plane, I asked the government twice to see if I could get on board to fetch my daughter, but I was told no twice. So I'm now applying for the third time, hopefully three times the charm, and I will be able to, go back to China with the government help and bring my daughter back. And I'm okay with paying my own fares to go to wherever that plane is. I just want to get my daughter back.
Did they say why that you couldn't the first time? Why they said no the first 2 times?
Yeah, they said no, but they didn't give me exactly why.
Okay, and how's your husband?
He's recovering, but who knows? He's still waiting for his test results. If that one comes back fine, then he should be out on Sunday, this coming Sunday. But what if it's not too well, then I don't know what's going to happen. So a lot of things are hanging in the air. I can only hope for the best.
Well, we're hoping for the best for you and your family as well. Thanks so much for making some time for us, Ms. Pan. That's
Thank you.
Amelia Pan.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
So what happens next for the people on that flight heading to Canada and for those still stuck in Wuhan? Minister of Health Patty Hajdu joins us in studio now. Hi, Minister. Hi, thanks very much for coming in. Before I ask you about this current flight and the next one, I just want to get your reaction. I know you're not Minister of Foreign Affairs, but on the situation that Ms. Pan faces, obviously she's pretty worried about her 2-year-old and trying to get over there. Is there any possibility that people who want to get to those in Wuhan might be able to, or is it?
So I can't really speak to that, and it is going to be case by case. I will say that the consular services are working very closely with families that are in that situation, and my heart goes out to them. As a mother myself, I can't imagine the anxiety and panic that Ms. Pan is feeling about her daughter and the concern for her husband. And that's the kind of scenario that we've been working through, as you know, in terms of children that are with someone who's a Chinese national or has permanent residency in Canada, and that Minister Champagne has been able to sort of negotiate with the Chinese government to allow some of those children that are in that circumstance to return on this flight. So what I would say to Ms. Pan is to just stay in touch with the consular services, and they'll work diligently to try and get the answers that she needs.
On this plane that is in the air right now, I believe we said right over the Pacific, Minister Champagne tweeted that 176 people boarded the plane. The information we initially had was that 194 were heading to the airport. Does that mean, are we to deduce from that 18 people were screened and not seen as fit to board the plane?
Possibly. I mean, that would definitely be one reason that someone wasn't allowed to board, because they were showing symptomology of the virus. But it could also be that they changed their mind at the last minute, and from other countries that have helped to remove people from Wuhan, they've indicated that in some cases, people have changed their mind at the last minute. It's a big decision for people. There might be people in situations where there is a family member left behind that's in hospital. There might be situations where someone's studying or working. There might be a number of reasons, and I think we'll have better clarity as the days evolve. So
at this point, just to be clear, the federal government does not know how many people were too ill to board the plane?
I don't have that information right now.
Okay, on the second plane, Minister Champagne said that another plane would be leaving Wuhan February 10th, coming back to Canada February 11th. Has that been confirmed with the Chinese authorities? And by that I mean, has the Chinese government given Canada the authority for that second plane to land?
So the work is ongoing right now in terms of the landing slot and the timing. Part of the challenge with the first plan, as you know, was just around the time to actually land at the Wuhan airport. It's very busy right now, even though there are not commercial flights coming in and out, because of delivery of supplies and other necessities that the Chinese authorities need in Wuhan. And so I'm sure he's negotiating that as we speak.
My question specifically, though, is whether China has approved a landing of a second plane. And I'm asking because that was the part of the delay with the first plane, that we had to wait for China to give permission for that plane to land. So regardless of the sort of specifics on the timing, has China said, okay, Canada, you can land a second plane?
So my understanding from Minister Champagne is those negotiations continue. I haven't seen any sense from Minister Champagne that there is any refusal of the Chinese government to land a second plane, but he's working out those
But there's
details.
no guarantee at this point either.
That's the work he's doing.
And just from a numbers perspective, I know that we've got this plane with, I think it's 176. There's also a number of Canadians that have boarded an American plane. when the second plane takes off, is it the expectation of the federal government that everyone at that point who has wanted to get out of Wuhan will have left?
So that is certainly our intent, is that after the second Canadian plane, that will, you know, again have seating for roughly the same capacity, about 200 or so, that there will be, you know, the Canadians that want to come back have been able to do so. But again, that situation will evolve because numbers fluctuate. People are, as we speak, registering with the consulate services for support. People take their names off the list to come back to Canada, and so. You know, we'll come back to you with updated numbers as we know. Given
the fluidity of the situation, is the federal government open to further efforts beyond even that second plane to get Canadians out of Wuhan, or is that the extent of this effort?
Certainly the consular service is working diligently to make sure that people get their needs met that are in these heavily quarantined areas. But I think it's probably a great time to remind Canadians that are in China that they should be looking for commercial flights to come back if their visit is non-essential. And that's because the situation is fluid. And as the quarantines continue and are prolonged, in fact, commercial flights are starting to become more difficult to get and more expensive.
But am I to interpret that as this is it for the government's effort, that these two planes are it, or is that not
I think
conclusive?
It's an assess as we go and determine sort of what the need is and the capacity is.
I want to circle back to who's on this plane, because when we spoke with you, I believe it was Monday night, there have been a lot of questions about permanent residents, and obviously China views permanent residents and Chinese nationals and dual citizens in a certain way. My understanding from our conversation Monday was that there would be a permanent resident could go on the plane if they were accompanying, for example, a child that needed them, and the child was a Canadian citizen. Is that still your understanding?
That is still my understanding.
So we have a gentleman who's reached out to us who was allowed to board the American flight, but as a Canadian will go to Trenton, etc., who's a permanent resident, and he's a citizen, but his mother is a permanent resident. There's no child involved. Is that, you know, is it black and white? Is it?
The understanding I have from the Chinese authorities and the negotiations that Minister Champagne conducted was that this was really about protecting children who did not have a Canadian parent with them, and that it was about making sure that those children who were Canadian could actually travel back to Canada. And he was able to secure assurances from the Chinese government that in those cases with children, that there would be an ability for a permanent resident to travel.
So it's your understanding that only if that child is with them, that
that's
the permanent resident. So it would be. It wouldn't make sense to you if the permanent resident was allowed on who didn't have a kid?
At this point, that's the information I have. Yes,
okay.
Certainly can check back with Global Affairs.
Okay. Yesterday you said something when you were asked by reporters about the length of time this took on the federal government's part. And I know before we've spoken about this, and you cited the sort of variation of fluidity in the number of Canadians who registered, as well as the negotiations with China. But you said something, I don't have the exact quote, but basically that your government could have done a better job. Do you think that did it take too long?
Perhaps that's the way that sentence is being interpreted, but what I'm saying is that we didn't have a sense of what the demand would be in the early days of people reaching out for help. In the very early days, when we first did the assessment, we had 63 or so Canadians that were registered from the Wuhan area that we knew of in that area, and the consulate services were actually reaching out to those individuals at that time to determine what their needs were. As we started to speak about the need to register with Global Affairs and the fact that we were there to assist Canadians who were finding themselves under quarantine, the numbers shot up the next day by about 100 more. And so at that point, we started to realize, oh, this is a big demand. Prior to that, we thought, you know, maybe we could actually secure some space on some of the other allied efforts to try and remove people from Wuhan. But we realized very quickly that we were going to need our own capacity.
I take your point. The U.S., though, Japan, South Korea, Jordan, Britain, Portugal, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and other countries were all able to get people out before us. Is there anything that your government could have done to expedite this process, or is this the result of strained relations between our two countries?
Minister Champagne has talked a lot about the work that he's been doing with the Chinese authorities, and in fact, no, quite the opposite. The Chinese authorities have actually praised Canada in terms of our measured response to being part of the global containment process, following the World Health Organization recommendations, and have been very complimentary to Canada's work. So listen, you know, we work with the information we have, and I think it's a great opportunity to remind Canadians that no matter where they're traveling, to register with Global Affairs Canada, because it does give us the capacity to much more quickly reach out to people when we know they're in an area that may be experiencing trouble.
Finally, before I let you go, I do want to ask you about quarantine. And when this plane lands, those individuals who are on the plane, the 176 of them, will be heading to Trenton, the base at Trenton. They're going to spend 14 days in quarantine there. Is that a decision you made based on evidence or one that was a political calculation?
Well, this isn't a decision made with Dr. Tam out of an abundance of caution. You know, they are coming from the epicenter. They've been under a heavily quarantined situation. They've been exposed in a way that many others have not.
But they couldn't board that plane if they showed any symptoms. Right?
Certainly, but we know that symptoms can be very, very mild and can be undetected. And so we want to make sure that we get the full range of evidence of the people who are traveling, and that we actually have information to work from that's based on a little bit of observation. So the quarantine is really about making sure that there is an appropriate length of time, and 14 days is actually the sort of outer limit of when people will start to express symptoms if they have the virus.
I'm asking though because from what I've read, and I'm not a medical expert at all, but it seems like, for example, quarantine was used quite heavily during SARS, and there's still not a lot of evidence that it helped prevent the spread of the disease. There are questions about whether this is too serious a measure to take, especially given the fact that those symptoms would have presented themselves before them getting on the plane. Like they wouldn't have been allowed on the plane anyway.
Well, that's not quite accurate, actually, because they're getting on the plane. They've been checked by the Chinese authorities once. They've been checked on the plane approximately another couple days, and they could develop symptoms in the next 8 to 10 days after they arrive in Canada.
Why not just self-isolate at home, and then if those symptoms present, another process?
Again, they're coming from really the epicenter of where the disease has presented. You know, 67 or 70% of the cases that have been identified to date are from the city of Wuhan. So out of an abundance of caution, this seems like a prudent course for us to take.
All right. Thank you very much, Minister Hajdu. Appreciate your time as always.
Thank you very much.
Minister of Health, Patty Hajdu. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.